They say corporate betrayal doesn't come as a thunderstorm. It arrives as an email marked urgent at 9:02 a.m. on a Monday. For me, it started with footsteps, fast ones, down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of chaos pretending to be authority. The door to my office slammed open so hard my coffee trembled. Standing there was Stephen, my boss's son, face red, veins pulsing like he'd just run a marathon of ego. And behind him, like a disappointed shadow, was his father, Mr. Langford. The man who'd built Langford Dynamics from a small family-run software firm into a mid-tier empire of automation tools. "She's been meeting with our competitors," Stephen barked, finger stabbing the air like he was conducting an orchestra of lies. "You can't trust her." "Fire her." The room fell into silence thick enough to choke on. Mr. Langford's eyes flicked from his son to me, searching for truth or perhaps just the path of least resistance. The man was tired. Corporate tired. The kind of exhaustion that makes people believe whatever keeps the machine running. I didn't say a word. Didn't deny it. Didn't defend myself. Just looked at Stephen. Calm. Silent. Because sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. You could almost hear him squirm under it. "I saw her, Dad," he insisted, voice cracking like a kid denied dessert. "Last Thursday, lunch meeting at the Harbor Cafe with that guy from Ion Systems, the competitor who underbid us on the Phoenix project. He thought he had me, thought he'd finally found the silver bullet to remove the woman who refused to laugh at his jokes or clean up his messes. He didn't know the man I met wasn't from Ion Systems. He was from Ashcroft and Reiner, intellectual property law firm, the kind that eats corporate thieves for breakfast." Mr. Langford sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Stephen, maybe we should—" But Stephen cut him off. "No, Dad. She's a traitor. You told me yourself loyalty is everything I wanted to laugh. Loyalty. Coming from the guy who once tried to sell our internal code to a client off the record for a consulting bonus. I'd saved his job that day. Quietly. Covered the breach before the board found out. He never thanked me. Just bragged later about fixing the problem. Now here he was, pounding my desk, demanding my head. Mr. Langford didn't look at me when he spoke. "Miranda, let's talk in my office." The rest of the morning blurred. People avoided my eyes. Slack went quiet. The same colleagues who once begged for my help on deadlines suddenly remembered invisible tasks that required urgent attention. That's the thing about corporate loyalty. It evaporates faster than coffee in a boardroom. By the time Mr. Langford called me in, I already knew what was coming. "Miranda," he began softly, like he was reading from a manual on empathy. "This isn't easy. You've been with us, what, 8 years?" 10, I corrected gently. 10. Right, 10. "You've been instrumental to our success, but with these allegations and the perception of impropriety?" There it was. Perception. The corporate guillotine that doesn't need proof. Just optics. "We have to let you go." I nodded. Calm, professional. Too calm for his liking, maybe. "I understand," I said. He blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Of course. You have to protect the company." He nodded awkwardly, relieved that the storm he expected never came. He didn't realize the storm had already passed, and I was the one who'd built the lightning. I packed my things slowly. My mug, my folders, the framed quote on my desk that read, "Integrity is doing the right thing when no one's watching." Irony's favorite decoration. As I walked out, Stephen was standing by the elevators, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face like a participation trophy. "No hard feelings, right?" he said. I smiled. None at all. He didn't catch the spark in my eyes, didn't recognize the look of someone who'd stopped playing defense. Because while they thought I was meeting competitors, I'd been documenting every piece of my work. Every line of code, every system, every diagram I'd built for Langford Dynamics over the last decade. And I had discovered something far more interesting than gossip. The company's flagship tool, the one they were preparing to license globally, still ran on a framework I had designed entirely. one I had never signed over ownership for. When I left that building, cardboard box in hand, I didn't feel fired. I felt free. Free to act, free to claim what was mine, free to stop being the silent architect behind someone else's empire. They thought they were cutting out a liability. What they really did was set loose the one person who knew where every wire connected and how to pull them without leaving fingerprints. They'd learn soon enough, because the next knock on their door wouldn't be from a competitor. It would be from the lawyers I'd just had lunch with, and the envelope they'd open wouldn't be a pink slip. It would be a cease and desist with my name stamped on every page. You'd think that losing your job after 10 years would hurt. But walking out of Langford Dynamics that afternoon felt strangely peaceful, like unclenching a fist I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. Outside, the air had that sharp post-rain clarity. I stood on the curb with my little cardboard box and watched people rush past, clutching laptops, coffees, and stress like they were medals. 10 years of building, debugging, firefighting, gone with one meeting. And I didn't even flinch, because I knew something they didn't. That week before everything fell apart, I had already started making copies. Not of company secrets, but of my work. The framework I'd created before Langford Dynamics even hired me. My original code base, my architecture, my automation logic. The same system they later rebranded and built their success on. I still had the earliest versions, timestamps, Slack messages, and email threads proving I'd brought it in as pre-existing intellectual property. That was what I'd been discussing at the Harbor Cafe. Not poaching offers. Protection. I'd seen it coming months earlier. The whispers about fresh leadership. The subtle push to replace older staff with younger, cheaper faces. I'd survived the last 3 restructurings, but this time the warning signs weren't subtle. Stephen had started shadowing meetings I used to lead. He'd ask questions he didn't understand, and then repeat my answers word for word to his father as if they were his own ideas. At first, I ignored it. You tell yourself it's temporary, that competence always wins. But competence without visibility is camouflage. And I'd been invisible too long. So when Stephen accused me, I didn't fight. Because fighting would have been playing on his field. I'd already moved the game somewhere else. The next morning after my firing, I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside my laptop. My inbox had already flooded overnight, some coworkers pretending to be shocked, others asking what really happened. I didn't reply to any of them. The company line had spread faster than truth ever could. Miranda was meeting with competitors. Miranda leaked something. Miranda went rogue. Let them talk. Rumors are temporary. Receipts are forever. I opened the folder labeled Langford_framework_ pre-2020. Inside were hundreds of files, scripts, flow diagrams, and prototype screenshots. Some had my initials embedded in the metadata. Others had Slack timestamps from years ago, back when I was still naive enough to think merit mattered. By noon, I was on a call with my contact at Ashcroft and Reiner, a woman named Dana, sharp as a scalpel and twice as dangerous. So they fired you, she said, sipping something unseen on the other end of the line. Convenient timing. Less than a week after I asked about IP ownership in writing, I replied. She laughed softly. Then they just made our job easier. Dana explained the process, filing provisional patents for my core frameworks, confirming authorship, building a timeline that proved what existed before my employment contract. I had the logs, the original GitHub entries, even early emails between me and a freelance UX designer from back when the system was just an idea in my apartment. Everything was lined up like dominoes. That afternoon, I went back to Langford Dynamics one last time to collect my last paycheck and sign the offboarding forms. HR greeted me with that brittle politeness they reserve for people who might sue later. Good luck, Miranda, said Karen from HR, smiling too tightly. You've been such an asset. Asset. Like I was a spreadsheet line item. I handed over my badge, signed the paperwork, and walked out without looking back. But as I passed the glass hallway, I saw Stephen in his father's office through the tinted pane, pacing, waving his arms, clearly proud of himself. He'd probably already told everyone he'd protected the company. It was almost poetic. The man who accused me of betrayal had no idea the company's flagship product, the one he bragged about to investors, still carried my command syntax, my libraries, my fingerprints. 2 days later, I got a message from one of the junior developers, Hannah. Miranda, just curious. Did you ever sign over the core framework ownership? Steven's been saying you did. I smiled at the screen. No, I thought. I didn't. Out loud, I only typed, "Be careful what you repeat, Hannah. Some things aren't what they seem." That evening, Dana called again. "All documentation verified," she said. "We'll file provisional patents first thing tomorrow. You'll be listed as the sole creator." I stared at my monitor. The green glow reflected in my coffee. For the first time in months, I exhaled without bitterness. The next steps would take time. Legal filings, review periods, letters. But the foundation was solid. Everything they'd built rested on what I had created. And soon the law would recognize that officially. It wasn't revenge yet. Not the loud kind, anyway. But it was the kind that starts quiet. The type that builds pressure behind closed doors until something eventually cracks. Langford Dynamics thought they'd silenced me. But in reality, I'd just started speaking a new language. The one written in legal codes and ownership rights. I didn't need to shout. All I had to do was wait. Because soon enough, the silence around me would grow louder than any accusation. And when the paperwork arrived on Mr. Langford's desk, with my name printed across the top, even Stephen would finally understand. You can't fire the person who built the floor you're standing on. It's funny how fast a reputation can unravel when people smell weakness. By the end of my first week unemployed, I'd gone from the backbone of Langford Dynamics to the woman who sold trade secrets. That's how corporate storytelling works. Accuracy optional, drama mandatory. The first rumor I heard came from Hannah, the junior developer who'd messaged me before. She texted late at night, a screenshot of the company's Slack channel. "Steven says you were consulting for Ion Systems for months." I stared at the message for a while before replying. Of course he does. I didn't ask her to correct it. I didn't care. Because while Steven was busy playing defense in public, I was quietly preparing my offense. Dana and her team at Ashcroft and Reiner worked fast. 3 provisional patents were officially filed under my name within 5 days. One for the adaptive framework architecture, one for the predictive automation layer, and one for the data synchronization interface. All 3 matched the skeleton of Langford Dynamics' main product, CoreLink. And the best part? I had timestamps proving my versions existed 2 years before the company ever branded theirs. Still, I didn't celebrate. I just waited. Because legal progress feels glacial until it suddenly feels nuclear. Meanwhile, the whispers spread. Friends from other departments reached out, carefully choosing sides while pretending they weren't. "We miss you here," one message said. But the timing looked bad. Translation: "We believe the gossip more than your track record." It stung. More than I wanted to admit. I'd spent a decade mentoring some of them, covering for their mistakes, staying late to fix code they'd broken. And now I was radioactive. I learned quickly that corporate loyalty is a handshake with a timer. Still, I stayed quiet. Quiet people make loud moves later. That Friday, I was eating leftovers in my kitchen when the phone rang. It was Mr. Langford himself. "Miranda," he said, his voice sounding older than I remembered. "Look, this isn't an easy call." I imagine not. He sighed. "Steven's young. Impulsive. Maybe he overreacted. But I've been hearing some concerning things. Legal chatter. Something about intellectual property filings." Ah, so word had started leaking. "I wouldn't know," I said evenly. "You know how rumors spread." He hesitated. "You didn't take any company material, did you?" "I took what was mine," I said. A pause. You could almost hear him doing the math, weighing ego against exposure. "We'd like to resolve this quietly," he finally said. "No need for unnecessary drama." Quietly. There it was again. The word people use when they mean cheaply. "I'm sure you would," I replied. But we're past that stage. He tried to keep his tone calm, but his voice trembled. Miranda, you need to understand, this could damage everyone. Clients, staff. It already did, I said. The day your son accused me without proof. Silence. Long, awkward, thick. Then he said, I'll have legal reach out. You do that, I said, and hung up. 2 days later, Dana forwarded me a letter, a polite threat from Langford's attorneys. They called my patents unsubstantiated and warned that pursuing them could constitute defamation and theft of proprietary assets. I read it twice, then laughed. They were bluffing, and badly. Their proprietary assets were my source code. Dana called me soon after. They're nervous, she said. We'll draft our formal response and attach your documentation trail. It'll shut them down fast, but I didn't want to shut them down. Not yet. I wanted them to sweat, to feel that subtle shift in the air, the kind that comes before a storm breaks. Meanwhile, Stephen kept feeding the rumor mill. He'd started posting on LinkedIn, vague, self-congratulatory nonsense about integrity and leadership and protecting innovation from internal sabotage. The comments were filled with clapping emojis and corporate cheerleaders. I didn't reply. I just took screenshots. Then something unexpected happened. Hannah called me, voice shaking, whispering like she was confessing a crime. Miranda, you need to know, the code audit showed something. The new build? It still has your original framework buried inside it, the one Stephen swore they rewrote. I closed my eyes. There it was. Confirmation. The company's flagship product was literally built on my protected IP. Every license, every client deployment was now a potential liability. You didn't tell them, did you? I asked. She hesitated. Not yet. But they're panicking. I think they know good, I said softly. Let them. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, watching the city flicker below. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt like gravity had quietly shifted. No explosions, no shouting, just inevitability. I opened my laptop, drafted a new email to Dana. Proceed with full filing. Include the audit findings. Notify the board? Then I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before adding one last line. They fired the wrong person. When I hit send, I didn't feel vindictive, just steady. I'd spent years being the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible support beam holding up someone else's empire. Now, I was the fault line. And the tremors were only beginning. By the second week, Langford Dynamics was unraveling faster than a bad code deployment. It started with whispers from former colleagues, messages arriving at odd hours, hesitant, laced with curiosity and fear. Miranda, did you really file patents? Stephen's been losing it in meetings. Legal is doing some kind of emergency audit. People are freaking out. I didn't respond to most of them. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd already said everything I needed to say. With documents, not words. Ashcroft and Reiner had sent the official cease and desist notice 3 days earlier. It was addressed to the CEO, copied to the board, and written in the kind of language that makes executives sweat through their tailored suits. Each section listed a specific module, library, or process derived directly from my work, complete with creation timestamps and version histories. Dana called me that morning. They'll either fold, she said, or they'll fight. But if they fight, they lose harder. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Then let them pick. She chuckled. You're calmer than most clients in your position. I had 10 years to practice. By noon, I started hearing things. A manager I used to work with, Rick, called from his personal phone. They shut down internal access to CoreLink, he whispered. Whole dev team's locked out. Something about pending IP verification. Stephen's pacing the hallways like a caged animal. It was surreal, knowing the storm I'd set in motion was finally landing. Later that day, Hannah texted again. Stephen's blaming everyone. He called an emergency meeting and said someone must have leaked to you. I smiled. He's not entirely wrong, I typed back, then deleted it. Instead, I just sent, stay quiet. Watch everything. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't anxiety. It was adrenaline. I'd spent years staying late at that office, watching men with less talent and more confidence climb past me. I'd fixed their crashes, rewritten their errors, and made their systems shine while they took bows. And now, for once, the system itself was glitching, exactly where it should. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. It was Dana again. "You might want to check the news," she said. There it was. Tech Today exclusive. Langford Dynamics faces IP dispute over core automation framework. The article was cautious but clear. An unnamed former engineer had filed patents that overlapped with the company's core infrastructure. They quoted an anonymous source saying, "The company may have unknowingly deployed unlicensed technology." Unknowingly. That word made me laugh out loud. Within hours, LinkedIn lit up. Investors went quiet. Employees stopped posting inspirational quotes. The silence was deafening and beautiful. By mid-morning, Mr. Langford called again. This time his voice was shaking. "Miranda, we need to talk." "I believe you're supposed to go through my attorney," I said. "I'm asking as someone who's known you for years," he pleaded. "You're a good person. This can't be how you want it to end." "End?" I said quietly. "No, Mr. Langford. This is how it starts." He exhaled heavily. "You've made your point." "No," I said. "I made my work. You just took the credit." There was a long silence, then, softly, "My son made a mistake." I almost felt sorry for him then, not because of the company, but because he still didn't understand. It wasn't just Steven. It was everyone who'd watched it happen and said nothing. Everyone who'd laughed it off when my work disappeared under someone else's name. The reckoning wasn't personal. It was systemic. By the end of that day, Langford Dynamics froze all public client updates. Their support portal went offline for maintenance. The industry blog started speculating about licensing issues, potential legal exposure, and investor withdrawals. And while chaos brewed on their side, my life became strangely simple. Mornings were quiet again. No endless Slack threads, no late-night urgent fixes for other people's blunders. Just me, a cup of coffee, and the steady hum of justice catching up. Still, I wasn't naive. Companies like Langford didn't crumble overnight. They patched holes, spun narratives, found scapegoats. And I knew exactly who they'd turn to next. Steven. Sure enough, a few days later, Rick called again. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, "but the board's having an emergency meeting. They're demanding proof Steven led the development. Legal found metadata tying everything back to your original commits. I could picture it. Steven sitting there, red-faced, fumbling excuses while the board dissected every lie he'd told. "What happens now?" I asked. "They're trying to control the damage. The investors are threatening to pull out unless they resolve the IP issue within the week." I thanked him and hung up. Then I poured myself another coffee, opened my window, and let the breeze in. For years, I'd been told that humility was a virtue, that staying quiet made me a team player. But humility in the wrong room just paints a target on your back. Now, as I watched the company that dismissed me drown in its own negligence, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge. I just needed recognition. And the truth had already started to speak for itself. Langford Dynamics was learning the hardest corporate lesson of all. You can't build an empire on stolen ground. And tomorrow, they'd learn what it costs to try. The morning the settlement email arrived, I was halfway through washing dishes. My laptop chimed from the other room, a single, sharp sound that cut through the silence. I dried my hands, opened the screen, and there it was. Subject line, Resolution Agreement, Langford Dynamics. For a second, I just stared at it. 10 years of late nights, ignored contributions, stolen credit, and quiet endurance all distilled into one email. My heartbeat slowed. This was it. Inside was the official letter from their attorneys, every word perfectly polished, every sentence dripping with corporate diplomacy. Langford Dynamics acknowledges that portions of the CoreLink framework originated from intellectual property developed solely by Ms. Miranda Holt prior to her employment. There it was. Acknowledgement. On record. In recognition of this, Langford Dynamics will license said technology under Miranda Holt Consulting LLC, with annual royalties and full creator attribution. Both parties agree to a mutual non-disparagement clause. I laughed quietly. They wanted silence in exchange for respect. For me, that was a bargain I could live with. Dana called 10 minutes later. "Congratulations," she said. "They caved faster than I expected." "Fear is a good motivator," I replied. "You did this right, Miranda." No drama, no social media explosions, just precision. "That's how systems collapse," I said. Quietly. It wasn't victory champagne that night. Just tea, a clean inbox, and a calm I hadn't felt in years. The kind of calm that comes after finishing something enormous. Something right. But while I had closure, the news kept moving. The industry blogs ran with the story again. The headline read, "Langford Dynamics settles IP dispute after internal audit confirms authorship." They used my initials, not my full name, but everyone who mattered knew. Stephen, of course, disappeared from the company site within 48 hours. His LinkedIn went private. A week later, he posted a vague update. Taking time to reflect and explore new opportunities. I didn't bother to check the comments. Mr. Langford reached out once more, this time by email. "Miranda, I know things ended badly. I want you to know I never meant for it to go this far. I wish you the best." I typed a reply, then deleted it. Some apologies don't need responses. Instead, I focused on the future. Dana had suggested I formalize my consulting business, and within a month, Holt Systems Consulting LLC was born. My first clients? Two mid-sized tech firms who'd quietly severed their contracts with Langford Dynamics after the scandal. They wanted stability and trust. When I walked into my new workspace for the first time, just a small rented office downtown, bright with morning light, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Ownership. Every desk, every line of code, every decision was mine. I hired Hannah first. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to leave the safety of a big company, but she came anyway. "I don't want safety anymore," she said. "I want honesty." I handed her a laptop and smiled. "Then you're in the right place." Within weeks, the office came alive. The sound of keys tapping, coffee brewing, quiet laughter, all without the toxicity, the posturing, the politics. Just work that mattered. Sometimes, though, the past echoes. A few months later, I ran into one of my old colleagues, Rick, at a tech conference. He looked sheepish when he saw me. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Back then, I didn't say anything. I should have," I nodded. "We all make choices." Some louder than others, he hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, everyone's saying you handled it with class. The board still uses your case as an example during compliance meetings." That made me laugh. Glad I could be educational. After he left, I found a quiet corner and watched people passing by, most of them younger versions of who I used to be. Ambitious, hopeful, maybe a little naive. And I thought about the lesson I'd learned too late. Loyalty without respect is servitude. Langford Dynamics would survive, probably even thrive again. The world forgets fast, but their code, their foundation, their success, all of it now carried a small digital signature. My name, etched deep in its architecture, invisible to the untrained eye but always there. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd tried to erase me from their system, and now they'd spend years paying me every time they used it. One evening, I stayed late at the office. The lights dimmed as the city outside flickered into night. Hannah had gone home hours ago, and the quiet hum of the servers filled the room. I opened an old file on my computer. The first version of the framework I'd ever written. back when it was just an idea and a dream. At the bottom of the code, in a comment line, my younger self had written, "Build something that outlives you." I smiled, because I had. And it had taken betrayal, loss, and a false accusation to finally make me realize it. As I shut down my laptop, I thought about Stephen's words that day. "She's been meeting with our competitors, fire her." He was half right. I wasn't meeting competitors, I was meeting lawyers. And now I didn't just have my job back, I had my name back, my future. And every time Langford Dynamics powered up their systems, they'd be reminded, the woman they fired was the one who made them run. The fluorescent lights in our office always flickered around 4:45 p.m., like they were protesting the start of another late night. Usually, I stayed until 8 or 9, long after everyone else had gone home, tying up loose ends no one else wanted to handle. But on that Thursday evening, something inside me snapped in a way I didn't fully understand yet. My name is Mandy Fletcher. I'm 42 years old, and until that night, I'd been convinced that loyalty and hard work guaranteed stability. Turns out, loyalty in corporate life only matters when it benefits someone else. The moment that changed everything happened at 4:52 p.m. I was sitting across from my boss, Grant Saunders, who was scrolling through emails on his phone while I finished presenting the quarterly improvements I'd personally spearheaded. 28% faster turnarounds, 40% fewer client complaints, and a new onboarding system that had saved the company more than $200,000 this year alone. I'd spent the last 2 months preparing that report. Data, projections, case studies, everything. When I finally stopped talking, Grant looked up at me with the kind of expression people give toddlers who proudly show off a scribble. "A promotion?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "Mandy, maybe in a few years. You're reliable, but leadership requires presence. Big picture thinking. Reliable presence. Big picture. Corporate language for, you do all the work, but you'll never get the title." He chuckled, actually chuckled, and said, "But hey, keep grinding and we'll see." I thanked him, because that's what people like me are conditioned to do, and I walked out with my heart pounding and the edges of my vision buzzing. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was hollow, but the real turning point came the moment I returned to my desk. It was 4:59 p.m., and for the first time in years, I stared at the clock like it was some forbidden object. 5 o'clock was something other people celebrated. Parents who left to pick up kids, coworkers who had hobbies, gym classes, friends, people who had boundaries, people who weren't me. Then something strange happened. I closed my laptop. I grabbed my coat. And I walked out. My coworkers looked at me like I'd grown wings. One even whispered, "Is she sick?" But I said nothing. I just kept walking. And as I stepped outside, the cold January air hit my face, and God help me, I felt free. Not empowered, not confident, not rebellious. Just free like I'd stepped off a treadmill that had been speeding up for 8 straight years. I made it home by 5:40 p.m., and my husband, Chris, nearly dropped the spoon he was holding. "You're home early," he said, blinking. "Yeah," I said, hanging up my coat. "I decided to leave on time today." His expression softened in a way I didn't expect. "I like this version of you." It stung in the way truth usually does. For years, I'd been the dependable one, the first to volunteer, the one who solved problems quietly, the one who carried the weight of 3 roles without complaining. Grant used to joke that I kept the department running. I always laughed along, not realizing he meant it literally. But that night, as Chris and I cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done in months, I realized how much of my life I'd traded for stability that wasn't even real. I slept well for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I still arrived early. but not early enough to clean up everyone else's chaos before the day started. At 8:58, I walked into the bullpen with a coffee and my hair still damp from the shower. People actually stared. "Mandy, did you get stuck in traffic?" Someone joked. "No," I smiled. "I got stuck respecting my time." They laughed, unsure how to interpret that. By 10 a.m., small cracks began to appear. A vendor had changed their invoicing process overnight, a problem I usually handled quietly before anyone even noticed. This time, when the panicked email chain started circulating, I didn't swoop in. I just watched. At noon, a client complaint escalated because the support team didn't know the correct workaround in the system. Another thing I usually handled. And by 3 p.m., our biggest client, Atlas Dynamics, sent a furious message that they'd been waiting 4 days for a contract revision that Grant had forgotten about. You know who always reminded him? Me. But I didn't this time. Because according to him, I wasn't ready for leadership. That was Thursday. By Friday afternoon, the stress in the office was visible. People rushing, phones ringing, Slack messages firing like arrows in every direction I left at 5 p.m. again. And that was when the universe finally decided to reveal its hand. 2 days later, Sunday morning, I woke up to 38 missed calls, most from Grant. Some from corporate. 3 from the CEO, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. I stared at my phone, heart pounding, knowing without a doubt. This wasn't about a lost file or a delayed email. Something much bigger had broken. And I wasn't sure if I was the cause or the solution. But I knew one thing. They had finally realized what happened when I stopped doing all the invisible work they never once appreciated. When I finally sat up in bed that Sunday morning, the first thing I felt wasn't fear. It was disbelief. 38 missed calls? I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd somehow pocket-dialed my way into a crisis. But no. Every call was real. Every voicemail was real. And every message had the same nervous, frantic tone. "Mandy, call me. ASAP." The last voicemail was from Grant. His voice shook. "Mandy, we need you. Please call me back. As soon as you get this." I stared at the phone for a long moment. For years, I'd jumped the second my phone buzzed. Nights, weekends, even during anniversaries and birthdays. For years, I'd been told that I was so reliable that they could always count on me. And now, after 1 week of not overworking myself, they were in full meltdown. I set the phone down without calling back. Instead, I walked into the kitchen where Chris was pouring coffee. "You're quiet," he said, glancing at me. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Work called. A lot." He raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. They've finally noticed you're not running the entire department by yourself anymore?" I exhaled slowly. "It looks like it." He placed a mug in front of me and sat down. "You don't owe them your Sunday." And he was right. For the first time, I actually believed it. Still, 38 missed calls. Something serious had happened. Around 10 a.m., my friend and coworker, Lila, sent a text. "Lila, call me, I'm begging you. Something exploded on Friday." I sighed, grabbed my phone, and called her. She picked up instantly. "Finally, Mandy, what the hell is going on? Everything fell apart after you left." I stayed quiet. "What do you mean?" "You know that contract revision for Atlas Dynamics? The one Grant forgot to finalize? Well, they pulled the plug on the entire renewal." My chest tightened. "They canceled the renewal? That contract is worth $3 million per year." "Exactly. And because the renewal wasn't processed correctly, Atlas thinks we intentionally stalled to renegotiate at a higher cost. They emailed the CEO directly, accusing us of incompetence." I swallowed. Hard. "And it gets worse," she continued. "Finance realized late Friday that the vendor invoices from January weren't processed because the new system update overwrote your workflow notes. Nobody knew the workaround. Because I was the one who always handled it. I whispered. Yes, and then, oh God. Legal found out that the compliance documents you usually prepare weren't submitted on time. They thought you were still doing them. But compliance isn't even in my job description. I know, but everyone assumed you'd handle it. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue. Mandy, she said softly, people are panicking. Corporate is flying in tomorrow. That explained the unknown number. They're calling an emergency meeting at 8 a.m. Monday, she added. They want you there. Grant practically had a breakdown. I closed my eyes. Lila, I didn't cause this. I know you didn't. They caused it by piling everything on you and pretending it was normal. I thanked her, hung up, and sat alone in the kitchen. For years, I'd been the invisible safety net the entire company quietly depended on. But the moment I stepped back, even just a little, everything collapsed. And the sickest part? My job description didn't cover half of what I'd been doing. That night, I lay awake thinking about Monday. I wasn't afraid of being fired. If anything, that would have felt like a relief. What scared me was something deeper. What if they tried to drag me back into the same cycle? Because I knew how people like Grant operated. They didn't apologize. They panicked, begged, manipulated, and then, once the crisis passed, pretended nothing had happened. I wasn't going back to that. Not anymore. When I walked into the office Monday at 7:58 a.m., all eyes turned to me like I was a ghost returning from the dead. People actually whispered Grant stood outside conference room C, pale and sweating. The moment he saw me, he rushed over. Mandy, thank God. We need to talk. I held up a hand. The meeting starts at 8. We'll talk then. His mouth opened, then closed again. He followed me like a lost dog. Inside the conference room were the CEO, Marianne Ford, the regional director, 2 corporate auditors, legal counsel, and 3 department heads who suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Documents were spread across the table. Thick stacks. Chaos printed on paper. When the clock hit 8 o'clock, Marianne cleared her throat. Mandy, please sit. We have several issues to discuss. Grant swallowed loudly, his voice barely a whisper. She's the only one who can fix this. He wasn't wrong, but not for the reasons he thought, because fixing the system wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that they never built one without me. And now, they were finally forced to face what happened when a company leans too heavily on a single, unrecognized backbone. As I sat down and folded my hands, I realized this was no longer their emergency. It was my moment. The moment everything shifted. The conference room felt colder than the rest of the office, like the air conditioning had been cranked up just for this emergency. Everyone looked tense, wide eyes, stiff shoulders, tapping pens. I'd been in plenty of high-pressure meetings, but never one where every single person seemed terrified of me walking out. I took my seat slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. The CEO, Marianne Ford, didn't waste time. Mandy, she began, folding her hands. We're in a serious situation. Several critical failures occurred last week. We need to understand what happened. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was careful, almost diplomatic. That alone told me how bad things were. I nodded. I'm listening. Before Marianne could continue, Grant blurted out, It all fell apart because Mandy wasn't here. She handles these things. I turned my head sharply, giving him a look that shut him up instantly. Marianne's eyes flicked to him, unimpressed. Grant, we will get to you. For now, Mandy, could you walk us through your typical responsibilities? There it was. The question I had waited 8 years to hear. I opened the binder I'd brought with me. A binder I didn't need, but one that made a point. Inside were printed pages of my job description, with the company logo stamped on each page. This, I said, sliding the first page onto the table, is what I'm officially responsible for. Everyone leaned in, a few brows lifted. And what I actually do? I continued. Well, that's different. The room grew still, I began listing everything I'd handled over the years. By the time I finished, the regional director was staring like he'd just witnessed a ghost. "You did all that?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "And how much of that," Marianne asked carefully, "is part of your job description?" "Very little," I replied. A hush fell around the room. Even the auditors paused their note-taking. I continued. "For years, I took on more and more because nobody else knew how to do these tasks. And instead of fixing the gaps, management relied on me to plug them." Marianne shot a sharp look at Grant. He shifted uncomfortably. "Mandy's always been reliable." "That's not a compliment, Grant," I said softly. "It's a warning sign." One of the auditors cleared his throat. "Can you explain last week's failures from your perspective?" "Sure," I said. "Let's start with Atlas." I explained, clearly methodically, how the contract revision had been left forgotten because Grant never followed through. Then I detailed how the vendor invoicing error happened because the system update wiped my notes. And since no one else had ever learned the process, everything stalled. Then the compliance failure, because the documents had been handed to me unofficially, despite not being in my scope. And finally, the escalation breakdown, because the department's roles were a mess and I'd been the patchwork solution for years. Every point was factual. Calm, professional. But the consequences were devastating. Marianne leaned back, processing everything. "So the root issue is not Mandy's absence. The issue is that our systems rely too heavily on one person. And that person isn't me," I said. "It's whoever is willing to take on unpaid labor." Silence, complete silence. Grant looked like someone had kicked his chair out from underneath him. "Mandy," Marianne said after a long pause, "I need you to understand how serious this is. Atlas is threatening to terminate the entire contract. We stand to lose $3 million a year, and they've requested you specifically for a meeting tomorrow." I blinked. "Why me?" "Because you're the only one who seems to understand their needs." Of course. Of course they wanted me now. I took a slow breath. "I'm willing to help, but I won't walk back into the same situation." "What do you mean?" Marianne asked. "This company has taken advantage of my loyalty, my time, my skills. I've sacrificed years of weekends, nights, and holidays. And what did I get? A laugh when I asked for a promotion." Grant flinched. "I'm not angry," I continued. "I'm done." Marianne leaned forward. "Mandy, what do you want?" There it was, a question I never thought they'd ask. "For starters," I said, steady and calm, "I want clear boundaries, clear responsibilities, real support, and recognition that matches the work I do." The room held its breath. "And if that's not something this company is willing to provide?" I looked at Grant, then back to the CEO. "Then you'll need to find someone else to put out fires you didn't plan for." Marianne looked at me for a long time, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. "We'll need to discuss this further," she said finally. "But Mandy, don't make any decisions today." Translation: "We can't afford to lose you. But for once in my life, I realized I could afford to lose them." I spent the rest of Monday in a strange limbo, half working, half watching the office unravel around me. People kept passing my desk with tentative smiles, as if approaching a recovering patient. Others avoided eye contact entirely, probably afraid I'd snap or walk out again. What they didn't understand was simple. I wasn't angry anymore. I was evaluating. By late afternoon, the emergency meeting's shockwaves had reached every corner of the building. The gossip traveled fast. Everyone suddenly realized just how much I'd been handling behind the scenes. Some looked guilty. Others just looked scared. And a few, honestly, looked relieved that someone had finally said it out loud. Around 4:30 p.m., Lila stopped by my desk with 2 cups of tea. "You okay?" she whispered. "I think so," I said. "It's been a day." That's one way of putting it. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. Rumor is corporate might shake things up. Big changes. I knew exactly what that meant. And Grant? I asked quietly. She made a face. Let's just say he's been pacing around the office like a man waiting for a firing squad. I didn't cheer at that. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accountability. Just keep breathing, she said, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze. They need you more than they realize. Maybe but needing someone and valuing them were two very different things. At 4:58 p.m., right as I was shutting down my computer, an email from CEO Marianne Ford popped up. Subject: Please see me before you leave today. Urgent. I hesitated. I didn't owe her my evening. Not anymore. But something told me this wasn't a conversation I could or should delay. I walked to her office, knocked once, and she waved me inside immediately. Mandy, she said, standing rather than sitting. Thank you for coming. Her posture was stiff but not hostile. It reminded me of someone preparing for a conversation they should have had a long time ago. Close the door, please. I did. There was a long silence before she spoke. I reviewed everything you said in the meeting, and I spoke with legal, compliance, finance, and operations. She paused. They all said the same thing. I didn't respond. I wanted her to say it. You've been carrying responsibilities that should have been split between at least 3 departments. There it was. The truth. Finally. And, she added, rubbing her temples, it's clear Grant has been using you as a crutch instead of managing properly. My heart thudded once. I'm not here to get anyone fired. I know, she said. But this is bigger than Grant. This is about the structure of the department and your future here. She took a slow breath. I want to offer you a solution. My stomach tightened. Tomorrow morning, she continued, Atlas Dynamics wants a full restoration plan. They've specifically requested you be present. If we handle that meeting correctly, we can not only save the contract, we can also rebuild our relationship with them. And you want me to lead that meeting? No, Marianne said. I want you to lead the department. I blinked. Hard. What? We're creating a new role. Director of Operational Strategy. Full authority to restructure the processes, delegate responsibilities, and ensure no single point of failure ever happens again. I stared at her, unsure if I should laugh, cry, or walk out. She continued, It comes with a 30% salary increase and 2 additional hires of your choosing. You'd report directly to me. It was everything I had wanted. For years, recognition, authority, support, a real path forward. But a part of me stayed cautious. And what about Grant? I asked. Her jaw tightened. He'll be reassigned, away from direct management. Translation. He's being demoted without the title change, I exhaled slowly. Marianne, you're offering a big change after one crisis. Are you sure this is about improvement and not panic? She met my eyes. Both can be true, but one thing is certain. We can't run this company without someone who actually understands how it works. That hit harder than I expected. I'd spent so long feeling invisible that hearing the truth spoken so plainly nearly felt unreal. I need to think about it, I said quietly. I expected you would. She nodded. Take tonight. But Mandy, if we lose Atlas, it won't be because of you. If we lose you, that's a different matter entirely. A hint of vulnerability slipped through her voice, something rare in someone like her. I thanked her, left her office, and walked toward the elevators, feeling a pressure I hadn't felt before. Not guilt, not obligation, power. For the first time, I wasn't trapped. I had options, choices, leverage. But that didn't mean I'd say yes, not yet. Because the one thing stronger than wanting recognition was wanting my life back. I walked out of the building at exactly 5 p.m., and as I stepped into the cool evening air, one thought echoed in my mind. Tomorrow, everything changes. but I still had to decide whether it would change for them or for me. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, something that hadn't happened in years. Not from anxiety, surprisingly, but from clarity. The world outside was still dark, that quiet pre-dawn blue, but I felt awake in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Today would determine the rest of my career, and for once I wasn't afraid of that. Chris brewed coffee while I got ready. He watched me quietly, the way people do when they sense someone is standing at a crossroads. "Big day?" he asked. I nodded. "They want me to lead the Atlas meeting." "And the new position?" "Still deciding." He came closer, resting a hand on my shoulder. "Just promise me you'll choose what's right for you, not what's right for them." I smiled. "I will." But even then, I wasn't sure which option that would be. When I arrived at the office, the tension was thick enough to taste. Everyone knew Atlas Dynamics could make or break our quarter. Maybe even our year, people whispered as I walked by. A few nodded with cautious respect. It felt strange, not unwelcome, just unfamiliar. Grant stood outside the conference room, pale and stiff. The moment he saw me, he hurried over. "Mandy, thank God you're here. I want to say, I'm not doing this for you," I said gently. His mouth closed with an audible click. For once, he didn't argue. Inside, the Atlas team waited. 4 representatives, arms crossed, eyes sharp. They weren't hostile, but they were clearly done with excuses. Marianne gave me a small nod. "Let's begin." I took my seat across from Atlas. The room was silent. Then I started. I didn't defend the company, I didn't blame anyone. I didn't sugarcoat the failures. I simply told the truth. I explained where the breakdown happened, what processes were missing, and how the company had relied on one person to cover gaps that shouldn't exist. Atlas listened, their expressions slowly shifting from frustration to something closer to respect. Then I outlined a restructuring plan. Not a temporary fix, not a bandage, but a full system overhaul. Clear responsibilities, cross-training, new tracking tools, real accountability. And, I finished, I'll personally oversee the transition to ensure nothing falls through the cracks again. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally, the Atlas director leaned back in his chair. "Mandy," he said slowly, "this is the first honest explanation we've heard. You clearly know this company better than anyone." He exchanged a glance with his team, then nodded. "We're willing to continue the partnership, with the condition that you lead the restructuring." Marianne exhaled in relief. Grant looked like he might faint. I thanked them. They shook hands and the meeting ended. It was done. We had saved the contract. But now I had a different decision to make. After the Atlas team left, Marianne asked me into her office again. She closed the door behind us. "You made that look easy," she said. "It wasn't." "I know." She walked around her desk, lips pressed together. "Mandy, the position is yours if you want it. We need someone who sees the gaps and can fix them." I looked at her carefully. "Do you want systems fixed? Or do you want me to be the one holding everything together again?" She didn't flinch. "I want you to build a system where no one has to be you." That struck something inside me. Something I wasn't expecting. "I won't give you nights and weekends," I said. "I won't sacrifice my time with my family. I won't carry the weight of this company alone ever again." "You won't," she replied firmly. "You'll have a full team, real support, authority, and boundaries. And if things go wrong, then we solve them together. That's what leadership is supposed to be." For a moment, I just stood there, processing her words. 8 years. 8 years of being overlooked, dismissed, taken for granted. And now, here was the thing I had always wanted. Not the title, not the salary, not the recognition, but the chance to be valued without being exploited, the chance to build something better, the chance to actually live my life. I took a long breath. "Okay," I said. "I'll take the role." Relief swept across her face. Good. I'm glad. I smiled, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. But I'm doing this my way, I added. There will be changes. Good, she said again. This company needs them. The restructuring wasn't easy. It took weeks of planning, new hires, hard conversations, and rebuilding trust. But slowly, methodically, things improved. Grant adjusted to his new role. He wasn't built for operations, and once that pressure was removed, he was surprisingly pleasant. Not close, but Civil Atlas stabilized. Other clients followed. My new team developed confidence, expertise, and independence. For the first time, I wasn't the only one who knew how things worked. But the biggest change wasn't at work. It was at home. I was home for dinner. I was present. I had energy again. I didn't dread Mondays. One evening, a few months later, Chris and I were sitting on the porch after dinner. He looked over at me and smiled. You seem lighter, he said. I feel lighter. He nodded. I'm proud of you. I leaned back, watching the sunset melt into the horizon. I finally learned something, I said quietly. If you spend your life proving your worth to the wrong people, you'll forget your worth to yourself. He squeezed my hand. And now? Now, I said, smiling softly. They see what I always knew. And for the first time, I truly did.